among other things, how you introduced new songs and guided us through hymns. We'll try to talk about this. You stumbled across some of the strangest and most amazing things as you're reading the scriptures, or at least I think I do. I hope you do. One that I go through the book of Job, which is something I don't think we had ever really done together before. And stumbled across in chapter 9, verse 8, a description of things that God does. In verse 8, He alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. Now, if you wonder who Jesus is, just think about a certain incident where he walked on the Sea of Galilee to go catch up with his disciples. He treads on the waves of the sea. Something only God can do, apparently. Last week, I wanted to talk about a biblical worldview, taking how the Bible describes the creation at its word, looking at evidence that suggests that the world is not as old as scientists believe it is, that God said that He created it in 6 days, and if you believe Him, take Him at His word, that it is 6 days. Now, a brave member of this congregation approached me afterward with some concerns about things that I had said during that message, and they're legitimate concerns. So I want you to know it's safe to come and tell me when I'm wrong. I might not agree with you, but it is safe to tell me. So sometimes I will agree with you. And he pointed out that there appears to be a difference in how the fourth commandment is expressed in Deuteronomy chapter 5. That it doesn't talk about God's having created in 6 days, but talking about how they were slaves in Egypt. And then in verse 22 of chapter 5 in Leviticus, pardon me? Oh, Deuteronomy, pardon me, Deuteronomy. I meant Deuteronomy. So strike out every time I said Leviticus, it's Deuteronomy. Thanks, Wanda. It's good to be married to a biblical scholar. So verse 22 says, These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. Then he added nothing more. Okay? So, if you read that passage, it sounds like God only spoke those 10 commandments in those words to the people gathered there at Mount Sinai. And so, how do you account for the difference between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5? One of the possibilities was pointed out that maybe that passage that talks about for the Lord created in 6 days, paraphrasing that, of course, is actually an inspired commentary added into that text. And the same goes with the part about resting because of being slaves in Egypt, also inspired commentary. That's a legitimate concern, that's a legitimate observation. The context of Deuteronomy 5 suggests to me that it is a paraphrase rather than a quote. and that Moses is actually talking about the whole covenant that was revealed at Mount Sinai, that the people started listening to and then withdrew and asked Moses to listen to the rest. So the context in Deuteronomy 5 suggests that that's the greater context of what Moses is talking about here. And to me, it seems that those commandments, he added nothing more, indicates that he's talking about that whole 4 chapters, chapters 20, 21, 22, and 23 in Exodus. And there's some of the phrasing in the Deuteronomy passage that refers to other things said during those 4 chapters. So that's how I have come to see it. You may disagree with me, and that is perfectly legitimate to disagree with me. But even if those were inspired commentaries, I don't see how that necessarily changes the 6 days. So, again, by all means, come see me if I'm saying something that looks wrong or illegitimate or a strange interpretation. I'd love to hear the feedback. I'm not perfect, and I hope we remember that we're all somewhat short of perfection. So, okay. And there's also a concern that I might be tarring the people who believe that the earth has been around for a long time, legitimate Christians who are scientists, people who believe in Jesus, people who've given their heart to the Lord, that I might be tarring them with something like an accusation of not being smart enough to figure this out, and I'm so much smarter than they are. It's entirely possible that I think that way, but I don't mean to disparage those people, certainly not in the Christian walk. So they have been taught something that has settled deeply into their psyche, and it's a paradigm that's very difficult to step out of. I'm hoping that we can teach our next generation not to step into that paradigm, to learn that there are legitimate ways of reading the scriptures and seeing that they don't contradict actual science. It may be a hard sell to people who are already convinced that the earth is billions of years old, but I came from there to here, and it's possible. So, all right. I want to start in Matthew 24. Find out whether New Testament believers actually believed in a literal flood. I'm pretty sure we all know the answer to that. It doesn't hurt to look it up. So Matthew 24, starting in verse 37. Actually, we start in verse 36 to get the context. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven. That's the time when Jesus returned, setting things straight. Not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son. So even Jesus apparently did not know specifically what day and hour he was going to return. But only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. But notice what Jesus is saying is that circumstances will be similar to how it was during the flood. Nobody will know when the time comes. I point out, however, that Noah and his family were already in the ark when it happened. They were in there 7 days ahead of time. They didn't know exactly what hour or day even, but they knew what they had to do about it because they knew ahead of time that there was going to be a flood. So But Jesus seems to think that there was a real flood and a real ark. The same story is told in Luke 17, verses 26 and 27. I'll turn to 1 Peter 3. Peter was, of course, one of Jesus' top-flight disciples. And he knew a thing or two about the Scripture. He knew a thing or two about what Jesus taught. First Peter 3 and verse 20. Actually, starting in verse 19, just to get... After being made alive, that is, after Jesus being made alive, he went and made proclamation to those imprisoned spirits, and being made alive is a translation, and some dispute that he was actually alive when that happens. I'm not going into that. He went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water. And then Peter goes on to talk about how the water of the flood is symbolic now of baptism, or vice versa. Baptism is symbolic of the waters of the flood being saved through them. So Peter seemed to believe that there was a real flood, is what I'm trying to get at here. You can also look it up in Hebrews 11, verse 7. I'm not going to go into that for time purposes, but Hebrews 11, verse 7 talks about how Noah was a faithful man who obeyed God and therefore condemned the world because of his faith. Okay. Where to begin? Well, Genesis chapter 1, usually a good place to begin in the Bible. If you could hear how many eyes rolled each time I started in Genesis 1 in our little church. In verse 9, we're skipping ahead a little bit, God said, "Let the water under the sky," it's actually under the firmament. You have to understand the firmament is where all the stars are too, so it's not just the sky, it's not just the atmosphere. "Be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And so it was. So, if you think about this for a moment, if all of the waters under the heavens are gathered in one place, how many pieces of land are there? How many continents are there? You think about that for a moment. You kind of suspect that there's one continent. Just saying, kind of suspect there's one continent, and that there's something to this notion that there was this supercontinent. Some call it Pangea. Others have thought that there was more than one of these in its ancient history. But there seems to be at least biblical evidence that there was something akin to a supercontinent. That may have something to do with what I'm going to say later, so just hang in there. So chapter 6. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. That gets into a whole lot of stuff. I don't have time for it here, but sons of God are either descendants of Cain or are angels that decided to cohabit with humans, depending on where you want to go with that. Then it talks about Nephilim. Okay, that kind of brings the story more to the angel side, the fallen angels. However, verse 5, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart were only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. And then it starts talking about Noah. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So take note, as in the days of Noah, lots of violence. Of course, we don't see any of that now, do we? Wars and rumors of wars, corruption. I don't think there's going to be a flood coming tomorrow, by the way, just not exactly like the times of Noah. But Jesus said that his coming can be compared to that kind of time. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, gopher wood, whatever gopher wood was. Like I have this image in my head of petrified gophers. No. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you're to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. And I can't help but think, I grew up in the days when Bill Cosby was actually okay. As Noah was saying, what's a cubit? Roughly 1.5 feet. Yeah, I see some smiles in there. Some people remember that too. Yeah. So it works out to roughly 450 feet long, roughly 75 cubits wide, and about, or 75 feet wide, pardon me, and about 30 cubits high, about 45 feet high. The interesting thing about those dimensions is that that's the kind of dimensions that a normal modern barge would have in order to keep it stable on the seas. It has to be long and relatively narrow and relatively shorter than it is wide. In order to be able to ride the waves, in order to be able to go face into the waves and not capsize. So whoever told Noah what his dimensions were going to be had some idea of how to build a ship, some idea of naval, I don't know, architect is probably the wrong word for it, but naval engineering. I've read a translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and you wouldn't believe what boat the Babylonian Noah was told to build. It was going to be a cube. You just imagine setting a cube in water and seeing if it will stay stable in rough seas. And then there are probably very rough seas going on at that time. So that's one hint that at least somebody back then knew how to build a ship, and that we're being told a story that has some kind of sense to it. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. And that's an interesting thing as well, because before air conditioning became a real thing, a lot of businesses, a lot of factories actually had windows right under the roof that were similar to what's being described here for air circulation. So somebody seemed to have some idea of how to keep air circulating in that kind of a vessel. put a door in the side of the ark, and make lower, middle, and upper decks. I'm pretty sure you'd have to have a pretty good seal on that door if it was going to be standing in the water. But you'd kind of need something like that for the animals to go in, probably a ramp on the outside. Make lower, middle, and upper decks. So last summer, Wanda and I took the opportunity to go to the Ark Encounter down in Kentucky. And as we walked up to this, now, we were told, even by the people there, no, this thing is not designed to float. It's kind of a model built to scale, right? It's built to one-to-one scale, but it's not designed to float. So if there were such a flood, don't go there to try to get into that boat. It's intended to give us an idea of the scale of this thing and some idea about how they might have been able to manage, for instance, to feed the animals using technology that would probably have been readily available then. It even had living quarters, because we never think about living quarters, and we certainly don't think about it when we see the bathtub ark in children's coloring books, right? With the giraffes with their heads sticking out the top. And nothing at all like that. If you want your children to have some idea that the Bible is giving true information, not a bad idea to bring them there to see the scale of this thing. You walk up to it and you look up and up and up. And it's only 45 feet high, but only. Like, this is a 3-story building here. It has 3 levels, 3 stories, and it's 450 feet long, which would make it, you couldn't fit it in Mosaic Stadium. Well, you could fit it in there, but it would kind of overflow into the stands. That gives you the idea of the scale of this thing. And you walk out of there convinced that, yeah, you could put all of the different kinds of animals in there. And the kinds is an important word. So Noah probably didn't bring tigers or zebras into the ark. What he brought was creatures that God selected because they have one job to do, and their job is to populate the whole earth. So rather than the specific varieties that we see now, he brought different kinds. And then the people who did the Ark Encounter calculated to be roughly 1,400 different kinds of animals. And they could have been less than that, but they decided to go with a bigger number, just to show, just to be on the safe side. So, creatures representing cat kind, horse kind, bear kinds would have been brought on board, and they would have had a high genetic potential. In technical terms, they would have many alternative alleles of genes. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce alleles or alleles of genes. Or what they say, high heterozygosity. There's that big word if you want it. Heterozygosity. Which means a lot of mixing of different traits within their genes. I think I talked about Mendel last week, how you have dominant and recessive genes. You spread those out in different environments, and ones, for instance, the dogs, right? We all know the dogs came from wolves. Try to imagine how a Chihuahua came from a wolf, or a poodle came from a wolf, right? You breed them together, you're not going to get wolves. I can guarantee that. If they have been selectively bred. What happens is that when you breed and select, you are are selecting for certain traits, which means that you're selecting out the corresponding other traits. So each generation that's selected has lost genetic information. Does that make sense at all? That's why you can't make poodles back into wolves. So they had to start with more genetic variety and then get it weeded out in order to get to all of the variations that we see today. That's the opposite of evolution, by the way. You don't add genetic information, you actually delete genetic information. Okay, so they go on board the boat. And what happens? I guess I better get back to Genesis. All right, Genesis 7, verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now you might wonder, okay, we have oceans now, and they have a certain sea level, and I've seen all kinds of different estimates about what would happen if all of the ice in the Antarctic and the Arctic ice shelves melted. That would raise sea level by probably about 2 meters. So all of the rich people who are telling us that we're all going to be flooded are still buying seaside land for some reason. So I'm going to believe what they believe. However, aside from that, so where does all the water come from to flood the earth to higher than the mountains? I'm sure you must have thought of that, right? You must have asked yourself that question. Where does that all come from? How does 40 days and 40 nights of rain produce so much water that it floods the mountains? That's a very good question. And of course, scientists quite frequently laugh at that notion because, you know, it seems completely ridiculous. Well, there are some creation scientists who have come up with a theory, is probably not the right word for it, but an idea called catastrophic plate tectonics. I've already said that we start with one continent, right? We seem to start with one continent, one huge continent, and somehow, when we look at the continents now, some of them seem to fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So, at some point they seem to have been together, and now they're not. Long ages Earth, scientists think that happened, an inch at a time, 1 inch per century or whatever. And therefore it took a long time. But some creation scientists came up with an interesting and quite novel idea, one of whom based a computer simulation on it. And that simulation, by the way, is used by almost all of the geophysicists who study that particular phenomenon. Because depending on what parameters you put into it, it could take a long time or a short time. Well, he chose to believe in a short time. And the key to that is the fountains or the springs of the great deep. So imagine if God caused a huge upwelling of magma in what is now the Atlantic Ocean bottom that pushes the continents apart, creating new seabed as it cools. The water directly above it is superheated. It just covers the world in cloud and dust. And this magma keeps circulating, pushing these continents apart quite rapidly until it collides with plates on the opposite side. You probably noticed that along the whole west coast of North and South America, there are mountain ranges that were probably pushed up. On the other side, the Asian side, is all seems to be mountains and volcanic islands. Makes sense to me. That might not make sense to you. When did the splitting of the continents happen? Probably during the flood. As the fountains of the Great Deep break open, we think of springs of the Great Deep as water, but there's other liquid stuff down there, and we know that there's magma down there. So it's not unreasonable to believe that that all happened during the flood. That's what I'm trying to say here. Do we have a biblical view of history? Do we have a biblical worldview? I'll just say one final thing, and I'm sorry it's taking a little bit of time here. What does it take to create an ice age? It takes cold land and warm water in the oceans to evaporate. You need lots of evaporation, you need lots of precipitation, and you need the land to be cold enough that snow stays from year to year to create glaciers. So catastrophic plate tectonics actually explains the Ice Age. So I throw that out there just for your consideration. No other long Earth hypothesis even comes close to the explanatory power of that when it comes to creating an Ice Age. So we come off the ark, chapter 9. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth and on all the birds in the sky and on every creature that moves along the ground and all the fish of the sea that are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you." And there are all kinds of things that other cultures eat that I would not partake of myself, but they seem to grow up and be healthy, and so I guess that still works. In verse 8, God said to Noah and his sons, "I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I'm making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." Now, we've had a lot of rain lately. We've had a lot of storms and sometimes huge downpours, some more than others, depending on where you live. And one and I lately have seen more rainbows than usual. And it was beautiful to see those. We love rainbows. And quite frequently, as the sun's going down, shining into the clouds and the rain has gone by, see these beautiful arches of color. And remember that God has made a promise and that we can count on his promises.